know if anyone from outside is wanting to pop on in. We're about to get started. Grab a seat. Welcome back to the Nature Repair and Climate Adaptation stream for day 2 of the conference. Our first presenter today is Tahnee Burgess from Landcare Victoria Inc. And she'll be presenting on cutting through the confusion about carbon, informing low emission farming with the Carbon Farming Outreach Program. Welcome, Tahnee.
Thank you. Thanks, Ange. I'm really excited actually because I didn't realise the conference was closed. I'm Tahnee Burgess and I'm the Carbon Farming Outreach Program Coordinator with Landcare Victoria, and I'm excited to officially announce your invitations to the after party. Now you might say, Tahnee, talking about carbon doesn't sound like a party to me. Well, you can ask any of my colleagues at Landcare Victoria. Addressing information is 100% my idea of a party. I've been working for the last year with the Victorian Carbon Farming Outreach Program, which is a collaboration between our 10 catchment management authorities, or CMAs for those outside of Victoria, Agriculture Victoria, our peak or AgVic, which is our peak state body for agriculture, and Landcare Victoria. And I think the strength of our program really comes from the fact that we work with our partners to each bring our own strengths to the program. So our whole program is designed to assist Victorian farmers to understand their emissions and the benefits of carbon farming. And we have the top-down expertise of state government experts. We have the catchment management authorities and their regional footprints and ability to bring together stakeholders and partners across the landscape. And then we have the bottom-up power of our Landcare communities in being able to inform what they want to learn about carbon farming and low emissions markets. So I'm going to start by setting the scene. This was a recent study done by the Victorian Farmers Federation looking at farmer priorities in Victoria. Now, it's a pretty long list, but for those that didn't bring their glasses today, second from the bottom, you can see climate change and emissions here. We have a really saturated space at the moment, and it's only worsened by the fact that Victoria's southwest is actually facing its worst drought on record. So the time of farmers and the issues they're facing is actually really important for us to consider when you start thinking about what information they need. Because our farmers are facing really hard conditions, they're facing a whole bunch of different pressures, and there's a perception that carbon and emissions aren't a priority, which means as we head towards 2030 and we start seeing emission reporting come down the supply chain, they're going to be unprepared. That's why it's really important that the Carbon Farming Outreach Program is working to actually break down some of the silos around these information topics. So again, carbon may not seem like a priority, but biosecurity is. And we know that shelter belts, while sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, actually improve your biosecurity. We know that soil health and understanding soil carbon and the role it plays in the dynamic soil space is really important for on-farm drought resilience. Multi-species pasture will actually reduce the emissions of the cattle grazing it, but it'll also help build that healthy soil underneath and again, improve drought resilience and animal health. In some cases as well, biofertilizers will reduce your on-farm costs, reduce your Scope 3 emissions, and also then allow you to build resistance to certain pests. So it's really important that as we consider messaging around carbon, we understand that we're not just messaging one thing. We're actually meeting a number of information needs, and we're really trying to address what farmers need to know. So our program is aimed at empowering farmers and landowners to make informed choices by increasing their understanding. As a base for this program, we've had, and I should say as well, the program is funded by DQ. And as a base, we've had their Train the Trainer package developed by Richard Eckard that informs best practice in a number of topics. So as the base for all of our events across the state, we have these core best practice ideas breaking down carbon farming and the science behind it. So it's really important to our delivery that we have really good quality information, and then we're able to package it in a way that people trust and make sure that we're actually relevant to their needs, and that includes a highly localised delivery model. So how's program delivery going? These numbers are a little bit out of date. Unfortunately, the slides were due a few weeks ago. But I'm really happy to say that we're actually very, very close to having engaged almost 2,000 Victorians around carbon farming. We've had 42 in-person events. We're now up to 5 webinars and a handful more podcasts. And I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug here and say if you'd like to catch up on any of the online resources, we have a couple at the Victorian Landcare table, but we also have a whole bunch on the Landcare Victoria website as well. So if anything I say piques interest, unfortunately I can't just info dump about everything carbon today. We've only got 20 minutes, so it can be a really great way to learn more if you want to go there. The attendees that we're seeing are primarily farmers and landholders, but we're really interested as well in the 10% that are service providers here. A large portion of that is our Landcare facilitators and Landcare professionals, because our program will wrap up in March 2026, and it's really important that as people come out of drought and have a need to find information on carbon farming they can trust, that they're able to go to their service providers, go to the trusted facilitators within their community, and those facilitators have the answers they need to be able to help their landholders. So as much as it's really easy to say, okay, it's only 10% service providers, we see service providers as having a massive impact moving forward in actually being able to help other farmers that haven't engaged with the program understand their emissions and understand low emission farming a little bit better. Of those that have attended, we've had an average event satisfaction of 8.6 out of 10. I'm also just going to tell you all a little secret too. The number goes up when it's run in conjunction with Landcare. Again, Landcare understands the needs of their local patches, and they're able to really effectively work with us and the experts at the CMAs and AgVic to be able to design programs that actually help people in their areas learn. And 20% of those that have attended are intending to take further action. The majority of this is increasing the carbon stored on their property, and then minimising greenhouse gases into the future. Part of this as well isn't just about registering for a carbon project. It's actually about farmers understanding what's happening on their own farms and being able to understand the impact of regenerative practice, understand the carbon sequestered by their trees, which can often be a bit of a shock for people as well, because if you're a land carer that's had established plantations, your trees may not be sequestering the carbon that you think they are, because once you're past that rapid 7-year early growth period, that number does really tamper off. But again, we still see people engaging with these topics, and we still see people wanting to plant trees. That doesn't necessarily mean it's for carbon though, because the most common answer we have to why do you want to take action is empowerment, mental health, actually being able to see the trees on your property and know that you're making a difference for the future. So I think it's really important that we don't silo things into just saying we're talking about carbon. We're actually talking more broadly about sustainable farming and regenerative agriculture, and making sure that we've got the context of the co-benefits of those activities as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Again, we're really, really lucky in our program that we've been able to work with communities to understand the experts they want to hear from. There's always the saying, farmers trust farmers, but more broadly than that, did you know farmers are actually the second most trusted people in the country on climate change and emissions? Because not many people do. There was a study by Monash in 2018, and farmers are second only to scientists in being able to communicate the impacts of climate change now. The point of that is to say that if you're able to work with experts that understand the science and understand farmers and can talk to them about the issues they're facing, you're going to be able to have a really positive impact, and you're also going to be able to explore a whole range of different possibilities in your event delivery as well. Not everyone learns at a conference with a slideshow. Sometimes you actually want to get out in a soil pit, go through the fields, see the difference of different multi-species pasture, and actually understand how it works within a broader farming system. Keeping it local is also incredibly relevant. We have a whole range of incredibly complicated and highly broad resources on climate change and emissions already. What we don't have are case studies that are local. What we don't have are people that are able to talk about the successes they're having in their own communities and share that with the broader groups. My third point here, in terms of effective carbon and climate communication, is to not make assumptions. We've now been messaging carbon farming for over a decade to most farmers, and some of them are incredibly highly literate. You can't necessarily assume that someone's a climate denier because they're not necessarily wanting to reduce their on-farm emissions. They might be waiting for further certainty in the market. They might be waiting for an update of methodologies to reflect the practice change, like multi-species pasture or additives to food, that haven't been recognised in those methodologies because it takes time for peer review to be able to actually verify that they're specific emission reductions, even though farmers may see that benefit first. And finally, if you wanted to be able to talk about carbon effectively, you need to emphasise the co-benefits. Again, if you only talk about carbon and emissions on its own, it's going to have very little context. And again, you're dealing with a highly saturated market right now for farmer attention. So please make sure that you're actually able to talk about why people should do this. Now, I'm just going to go through a few different areas of some of the co-benefits and how you can message around a couple of areas around carbon farming. So soil carbon, it's a very, very common one, and you often hear a lot of information around building soil carbon. However, it's not necessarily a static thing. So if you want to help people understand soil carbon, you actually need to look at healthy soils more broadly as a system. You actually need to understand that, for one thing, depending on your rainfall in that highly localised region, you may already be at your cap of the maximum amount of carbon that your soils are able to hold. Or if you're in a highly degraded cropping system, you might be at a very, very low end of what your the carbon your soils can hold, and be able to build that through healthy regenerative soil practices. But if you're going into a carbon project thinking that you're going to plug in one number and then in 5 years from now you're going to get a way higher number because you're just going to leave it, that may not necessarily be the case, because there's also a massive link to rainfall in your soil carbon levels. So you can do everything perfectly, you can have all of these incredible additives, you can spend years and years and years investing in your soils, only to have drought, which again is very topical for the southwest of our state right now, wipe down those levels. So it's really important that if you want to understand soil carbon, you're actually talking more broadly about soil health and where it fits in your broader farming goals as well. Because again, if you're then farming on the land you want to have a soil carbon project on, you're then extracting all the nutrients and disrupting that cycle of carbon. So you're probably not going to get the returns you may be promised by an external service provider. Trees and biodiversity is one of our most common communication and workshop requested topics. And again, there's a whole range of co-benefits in planting trees on farms. Depending on your planting style, you may have opportunities to develop agroforestry, you may be providing habitats and biolinks for native species, you may be using them to prevent erosion or biosecurity risk. And there's some really important ways that you're able to message that trees are going to be healthy and helpful. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you planted that tree for mental health or biosecurity, it's still going to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Finally, just as a few different points, there's an emphasis at the moment on supply chains. So as we approach closer to 2030, and I know MLA's just gone back on their carbon neutral beef goals, but there still is supply chain pressure coming down, and that's putting more and more burden on farmers. I've had many farmers compare it to the GST being added on a few years ago, but it's actually really important that we empower farmers in understanding their on-farm emissions, because for the vast majority of our state's farmers and our country's farmers, internationally we stack up. I know Fiona quoted yesterday that we are 43% lower on average than the US agricultural industry. We are 21% lower than the EU. So depending on your supply chain and your markets, You may still have a lower emission product in the EU where they've already got emission mandates before selling agricultural products. Even the added emissions of shipping all the way across an ocean will mean that you are competitive at market compared to local producers. So it's actually important that as we talk about supply chains and market access and we help people understand their on-farm emissions, we're really making sure they understand the power that gives them in their supply chains, because currently supply chains are desperate to understand what a good number is. And even just knowing that now and having time to get used to that process, because it can be a highly complex one, even with additional support tools coming online, like the AIA calculator, it's still a complicated process and it's time consuming, and I think it's rightly perceived as a burden to many. So if you're able to actually help people understand the value in doing that now, become comfortable with it, it means they're going to be better adapted to when supply chains actually do demand this kind of information. There's another point as well I really want to emphasise here, which is to really make sure that you're empowering farmers and respecting their autonomy. I don't think any information delivery should ever talk down to people. They understand their agricultural system better than you probably ever will, and they also understand their on-farm goals. So every property will be unique, every landholder and farmer will want to do something different, and it's really important that you don't necessarily shoehorn them into a carbon project, and that you instead provide them with the information they need to make informed choices, whether that informed choice be insetting, offsetting, or waiting and seeing the market develop a little bit more, or having additional technologies come online. There is still a huge amount of misinformation in this space, and it's really important that we all work to actually make sure that we're communicating on common ground. Again, I don't want to say the phrase Trojan horse and make it sound like it's some big sneaky trick. But often, if you want to talk about carbon and emissions or climate change, you may be able to do so by making sure you're using those co-benefits and using those actual tangible things farmers can see as a way to start the conversation before bringing up carbon and emissions. Because at the end of the day, it may not be a farmer's priority to understand carbon, because they may perceive that as just being for carbon farming projects. It's about making sure that you're actually contextualising that within their farming system. I think the mistrust of government and anger at renewables is something a lot of farmers across the state feel, and that's coming from a place of being unheard in a lot of agricultural settings. And we've had a massive disruption to a lot of cropping systems with transmission lines going in without consultation with local communities. And a lot of farmers near those transmission lines are still running off fossil fuels because there's not necessarily the opportunity for those renewable companies to give back to local communities. There's a perceived double standard here as well. I know some of the youth speakers earlier talked about the billions being given to fossil fuel industries. Well, we're not seeing that same investment in helping this transition to sustainable agriculture and lowering on-farm emissions. In fact, we're seeing very, very little information and government support and stewardship, despite upcoming changes to regulations and the fact that we know currently Australia's largest emitters are already reporting their Scope 3 emissions. By 2027, our medium emissions will be, and by 2030, we know more broadly, almost the entirety of the agricultural sector will very likely be reporting on their emissions. And again, there's some perceived uncertainty about broader carbon markets. I have word on the street is that they're not going to be going forward, but I can say with certainty that with the international context moving more towards the Australian model of verified carbon credits, they're here to stay. And we actually, as much as there's some massive issues in the ACCU scheme and methodologies, we aren't necessarily going to be seeing the market go away. So it's about making sure people have the information they need to be able to understand the changes that are going to affect them. So in addressing some of these points of misinformation, I would recommend using local and trusted communicators. If people don't trust government, you don't have to come from government. Work with communities to make sure you understand the information they need. If people are angry about renewables, make sure you're emphasising their on-farm resilience and empowering them and making sure that your information delivery respects their autonomy to take actions that they may want to. There's a perceived double standard, yeah, but you can have the co-benefits now of healthy trees on farms and broader returns and improve your efficiencies while decreasing these emissions. So it's again about changing the narrative around it being an added burden and instead emphasising some of those benefits. And that also helps with the perceived irrelevance. And in terms of the uncertainty, this is very hard for all of us with a science background, but lead with what you know. We know that trees and soil carbon is a really healthy and regenerative thing that's going to be able to help your farm stay sustainable now and in years to come. So start there and don't pretend you have answers to when we're going to see additives for cattle in the ACCUs framework. Work with people and make sure you're continuing to answer their questions and giving them the answers they need now. So I guess this is, again, another shameless plug for some of the resources we have on our Landcare Victoria website. For any Victorians in the room too, we have dozens of events going on across the state. So if you are interested in either hosting a carbon farming event or attending one, please reach out to me. I'll be here all day, even though the conference is over. And we can keep chatting. But again, just to summarise some of my key points. Carbon farming shouldn't be siloed into some separate, distant thing. Helping people have sustainable and profitable farms is something that we can do now. And that happens by emphasising the co-benefits of some of these activities, keeping it local and working with communities, showing action and not just information. Again, there's massive power in case studies, working with trusted communicators, and ensuring messaging meets the information needs of participants. So, yeah, I think that's everything from me, and thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks, Tahnee. I think we've got about 3 minutes for questions, so if there's a couple of quick questions in the room.
Tahnee, through the course of running that program, the 250 landholders, did you come across any inquiries about the informal carbon market? So this is all about the ACCUs and whatever. Yeah.
I should say as well, we do actually cover both carbon markets. So again, we're really about making sure that, so for informal carbon market is basically everything that's not an ACCUs. So there's a whole international smorgasbord of carbon schemes, and we've really been working to make sure people understand what's available for them. Again, we're a government-funded program, so we're just about making sure people have the information they need. But so we don't necessarily recommend ACCUs or private carbon schemes. It's all about just making sure people understand what they may need to know before signing on to a contract.
Yeah.
I came in late, I'm sorry. You talking about your field days across Victoria. Did you inform people what they were designed to do?
Yeah, so we're a Victorian carbon farming outreach program, and we've been running a whole range of different events all across the state. So field days are one of them. We've also had a whole bunch of webinars you can see recorded online. We've had podcasts. We've had dinners that are actually information sessions. We really work with communities to make sure the information is in the format they want.
Great. Thanks very much, Tahnee.
Cool. Thank you all so much.